Back here on Overtime, we'll talk a little bit more college football here. Mark, let's start with the Auburn Tigers because they have a better game coming up this week. But kind of put in a nutshell, boy, you saw last week from that offense that scored just 3 points in College Station against Texas A&M, and what they need to do this week if they want to look like the team that played against Arkansas, LSU, and Ole Miss.
Well, one thing that really bothered me about this Auburn performance is all year the offensive line had played really well. And they had protected Bo Nix, and they were one of the fewest sacked teams in college football. Texas A&M really exposed whatever weaknesses they had.
Right.
They had 6 tackles for loss. They had 4 sacks. And their defense has gotten so much better, A&M, after starting horribly. The first 3 games they have allowed almost 470 yards per game. That was including the Alabama game where they allowed 522. The last 3 games now against South Carolina, Missouri, and Auburn, maybe not the 3 best offenses, but they're averaging 246 now allowed per game. And you can see that they're very good at getting after the quarterback. They cause a lot of inaccuracies for an offense that's not used to dealing with the speed that they have, and they create turnovers.
Right.
That turnover they created with Bo Nix in the second half really kind of was the final culmination of them finalizing that win.
Right.
And I think up until that point, people were waiting for Auburn to come alive and have the Bo Nix we've seen this season.
Right.
And I think maybe even some people were wondering, well, if Finley isn't in the game, what is he there for? Because Bo Nix just simply didn't have it. Even though you've seen a lot of good things from Bo Nix this year, that was just a game where maybe he needed, a little relief, and then he would have been fine again. Didn't happen. A&M wound up winning. And then the other thing is that Auburn allowed 217 yards rushing the ball. This is the 4th time this year they've allowed over 200 yards rushing. Normally, their defense doesn't do that. And overall, I think Auburn has a pretty good defense. So that is as confusing to me as some of the concerns Alabama has running the ball, as Auburn not stopping the run this year.
Exactly, and you teed that up perfectly. Let's go to the Alabama Crimson Tide. Just 6 rushing yards against LSU. Like we talked about this with John last night. You will learn nothing against the fiery New Mexico State, whatever they are.
Yeah.
What are some of the things you'll need to see from the Tide in these next 3 games, just from a performance standpoint, because you can't really gauge it by the opponent, especially this week?
Well, how historic was that game? I mean, the fact is that since Alabama started charting rushing yards, there's only one other time in history that they had as few as 6 rushing yards per game. That was in 1990 against Penn State.
Right.
So that right there is number 1. Number 2 is you look at the second half, negative 19 yards on 12 carries. That's not good. Right. You look at the running backs, only 27 yards on 15 carries. Brian Robinson, Roydale Williams have to be a little more effective, but they didn't have the holes to run through. And that leads to the stuff rate, which is 27% of their runs were either for no gain or for losses. That's very rare when you consider that they had, 61 straight 100-yard rushing games before this season, even though against Florida they only rushed for 91. So that was their first non-100 in almost 6-7 years. Them not running the ball is as confusing as anything else that I've seen in this college football season. You look at Bryce Young, he played okay.
Right.
It wasn't his fault. It was the fact that an LSU defense, which has been pretty bad. I mean, you look at the fact that they allowed 330 rushing yards to Kentucky and over 265 rushing yards to Ole Miss, and Alabama couldn't run the ball against them.
Right.
That's a little concerning for me. So I would need to see them run the ball better. Obviously, they need to just blow out whoever they're playing this week in their latest Appalachian State cupcake game. And then as they're finishing off the schedule against Arkansas and against Auburn, dominate both of them, who were both physical teams.
Right.
If they can push them around and dominate them and show Alabama's back, that's what you want to see by the end of the year. This was a little embarrassing. I thought this was the worst game they played all year, even worse than losing to Texas A&M, because they just didn't click offensively. And to see Bryce Young running for his life consistently this year, their offensive line normally never has both problems, running the ball and protecting the quarterback. They couldn't do either of that against a very mediocre LSU defense. I think that's what Saban's really got to figure out. Bill O'Brien's got to figure that. There's a little bit of heat on him, too, now. Can you produce to get back to Alabama running the football, which is their strength and always will be their strength? Even though they can throw the ball, that is what Alabama stands for, running the ball down people's throats.
Exactly. We'll see if they can get back to it. Nick Saban says it all starts back in practice. He met the media this afternoon after practice.
You know, one of the things that we consistently try to emphasize with our players is, you know, the mindset that it takes to be a good practice player. And, you know, we kind of measure speed and explosive movement every day, whether it's in the weight room, on the practice field, or whatever. And I think that's really, really important that it shows the players how their mindset can affect their performance. So if you go out there and perform relative to how you feel, which I would think that most football players at this point in the season don't feel perfectly well, but you have to have the kind of mental toughness to be able to persevere through that, still push yourself to improve and get better, so that you can become a better player and evaluate and actually create more value for yourself, and also creates value for your team.
I think it's a good point there by head coach Nick Saban.
Absolutely.
Meanwhile, outside of Auburn and Alabama, Samford will be on the road facing a Gator team that's struggling right now. South Alabama also on the road at Appalachian State. Boone, North Carolina, not an easy place to play ever. UAB on the road at Marshall. Number 24, Louisiana Lafayette comes to Troy. And Jacksonville State on the road against Lamar. Now, JSU, obviously, with some headlines this week. Head coach John Gross stepping down. Maxwell Thurman is the interim head coach, and he met the media today talking about his responsibilities for JSU and trying to send out the team on a good note in the last 2 games.
It's an exciting time just because, you know, as a coach, you always, your goal is always you want to be a head coach. And I get that opportunity for at least, I think, 10 more days. So it's a fun time, and I can't wait. I think I'm excited to be around these guys, and it's fun for them. And, you know, the big thing that we talked about as a staff and talked about with those guys, like, you know, we have some seniors here that have opportunity to play their last 2 football games. And the big thing we want to do is not cheat the game of football and not cheat these last 2 weeks. So everything that we do, we're going to come in and we're going to be excited that we're football coaches and that we're football players at Jacksonville State. And so we're going to do our best to put a good product out on the field, knowing that we have some things that we have to do to give ourselves a chance to be successful. And so that's what we're working on this week. And, you know, looking forward to a really good opponent in Lamar. They do some things that challenge us on offense, defense, and in the kicking game, and we're looking forward to going to attack those things.
So those are the games here in state. Coming up this week, coming up in our next segment, we'll have our college football picks, and I'll just tell you what, on the front end, don't follow me, follow this guy. He's been hot. We'll have that coming up next.